Picture this: a sterile, softly lit clinic, a syringe filled with hyaluronic acid, a practitioner saying, "This will restore what's been lost." Now imagine realizing they're not talking about your face, they're talking about your labia. Not surgery, not reconstruction, just a few subtle injections to make things look smoother, fuller, younger. And here's the part that should make you pause. Most people didn't even know this was something they were supposed to worry about until it was already being sold to them. Labia fillers are one of those trends that slips in quietly. No big headlines, no mass panic, just a slow drip of clinic websites, before and after photos, and language that feels almost suspiciously reassuring. Confidence, rejuvenation, restoring volume. And suddenly, a part of your body that existed perfectly fine without commentary is being reframed as something that can age wrong. Because this isn't really about anatomy. It's about what happens when beauty standards run out of obvious places to go and start expanding downward, inward. I don't know, let's just get into it. Beauty standards used to live where people could see them: your face, your body, your hair, the visible stuff, the stuff you could point to, compare, critique, fix. Now, they're getting microscopic. And more importantly, they're moving into places that were never part of the conversation before. Labia fillers use the same hyaluronic acid injections you'd find in lips or cheeks, but placed into the labia majora to create volume, smoothness, and what clinics love to call a youthful contour. And if that phrase sounds familiar, it should, because it's the exact same language that was used on your face. First it was wrinkles, then it was volume loss, then it was facial aging. Now, the same framework has quietly expanded to include parts of your body you probably never once thought to evaluate this way. And yes, they say youthful, not healthy, not functional, youthful. Because apparently even your vulva now has an expiration date. And that's the shift. Over time, the body changes. Fat distribution shifts, skin loses elasticity, hormones fluctuate. That's not controversial, it's biology. What is controversial is what happens next. Because instead of saying, "this is normal," the industry says, "this is correctable." And once something becomes correctable, it very quickly becomes something you're expected to notice. Then question, then fix. And the wild part? A lot of people didn't even know this was something they were supposed to think about until there was already a solution waiting for them. Here's the uncomfortable question: where did this ideal even come from? Because unlike your face, your vulva isn't something you grew up comparing in mirrors, magazines, or casual conversation. There was no baseline, no universal reference point. So if an ideal exists now, it had to be built. And it was. Researchers in the Journal of Sexual Medicine and other body image studies have consistently linked exposure to highly curated genital imagery, especially through pornography, to increased dissatisfaction with natural variation. Translation: the more people see a narrow version of what vulvas should look like, the more they start to believe theirs is wrong. Not different, wrong. And that version? Small inner labia, smooth outer contours, minimal variation, almost simplified, almost edited. And here's where it gets a little eerie, because this isn't just about preference, it's about repetition. When the same version shows up again and again and again, it stops looking like one option and starts looking like the standard, even if it never was, even if it doesn't reflect reality. And once that standard settles in, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, "this is the ideal." It just quietly shifts how you see yourself until normal starts to feel like something that needs correcting. And that's the part no one really says out loud. Because when clinics talk about rejuvenation, what they're actually describing gets a lot more specific and a lot more uncomfortable. Let's sit with the word for a second: youthful. Because it sounds harmless, right? Soft, aspirational, completely normal in beauty language. But when you apply it here, it stops feeling neutral. Because what does a youthful vulva actually mean? It's not about glow, it's not about collagen. It's not even something most people were actively analyzing in their day to day lives until very recently. What's being described, very quietly, is a specific visual: less volume loss, smoother texture, minimal protrusion, tighter contours. And if you strip away the marketing language, what you're left with starts to look a lot like a body that hasn't gone through time yet. A body untouched by age, childbirth, hormonal shifts, by adulthood itself. And at a certain point, we have to stop pretending that's a neutral preference, because it isn't. I came across a clip from the podcast The Tea with Miriam Francois, one of those moments that just kind of stops you, where Jamila Jamil was talking about beauty standards. And she said, and I quote, "I just think we have a beauty standard that's been set by pedophiles," end quote. And that kind of statement doesn't just disappear once you hear it, it sticks. Because whether you agree with how blunt it is or not, it forces a question that beauty culture usually avoids. Why are we consistently rewarding traits that remove visible signs of adulthood from women's bodies? And this isn't just a viral soundbite. Writers like Taylor Parsilla Smith have explored this more directly, pointing to a long standing pattern in Western beauty standards that favor infantilization: smaller features, hairlessness, smoothness, a kind of visual innocence that edges closer to adolescence than adulthood. And once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere: bigger eyes, softer features, hair removal, baby smooth skin, and now rejuvenated genital aesthetics. Different areas of the body, same direction. Less age, less variation, less evidence of a lived in adult body. And that's where this stops being just about preference and starts looking like a pattern. Dr. Sarah Crichton, who has worked extensively in this field, has pointed out that many women seeking genital procedures have completely normal anatomy, but believe something is off because their reference point has narrowed so dramatically. Not because their bodies are wrong, because the standard moved. And when that standard consistently leans towards a simplified, minimized, pre aging version of the body, it's worth asking what exactly we're being asked to move toward. Why are we idolizing a version of the adult body that removes signs of adulthood? Why is aging something to correct everywhere? And why are we extending that logic into parts of the body that were never meant to be standardized in the first place? Because once you follow that thread, it doesn't just lead to labia fillers, it leads to a much bigger conversation about what beauty culture rewards and what it quietly erases. And once you see that pattern, you can't really unsee it. Because it's not just happening, it's being packaged, refined, sold back to you. Which brings us to something even more revealing: how this gets normalized in the first place. Labia fillers sit in a very convenient gray zone. On one side, there are legitimate medical or comfort related reasons someone might seek treatment, especially after menopause, childbirth, or significant weight loss. That part is real. But on the other side, there's marketing. And marketing is where things start to shift. Because the language is never aggressive. It's never, "you need this." It's softer than that: enhancement, comfort, rejuvenation, confidence in tight clothing. Nothing sounds urgent, nothing sounds extreme, but put it all together, and it quietly builds a narrative that your body has changed. That change is noticeable, and that noticeable change is something you might want to correct. Not because something is wrong, but because something could be better. And that's how a standard takes hold, not through pressure that feels obvious, but through suggestions that feel reasonable. This isn't new. Social critic Ivan Illich called this process medicalization, turning normal human experiences into conditions that require treatment. Aging becomes something to manage, natural variation becomes something to refine, and entire parts of the body become projects, things to monitor, adjust, maintain. And once that shift happens, you stop asking whether something is normal and start asking whether it's optimal. And that's a very different mindset, because normal allows for variation, optimal does not. Optimal always has a direction, a goal, an endpoint you're supposed to move toward. And once your body is framed that way, there's always something else to improve, something else to smooth, something else to restore, something else that needs fixing. Not because your body failed you, because someone figured out how to make you see it that way. Let's slow this down for a second, because this is the part people think they're hearing clearly, but usually aren't. Labia fillers are almost always described the same way: quick, safe, minimally evasive, which sounds comforting, but those words do a lot of heavy lifting. Because minimally invasive doesn't mean risk free, it just means no one is cutting you open. We're still talking about injecting a substance into a highly sensitive, highly vascular area, an area with a dense network of blood vessels and nerves. This isn't your cheek, it's not your jawline, and even with experienced practitioners, things can go wrong. The most common side effects sound manageable at first: swelling, bruising, tenderness, asymmetry. But even those can last longer than expected. And in a part of the body that's constantly in contact with clothing, movement, heat, healing isn't always as simple as clinics make it sound. Then you get into the complications that aren't always front and center in the marketing: infection, which in this area can be more difficult to manage and more uncomfortable than people anticipate; lumps or uneven filler distribution, which can require dissolving, meaning more injections, more appointments, more cost. And then there are the rare but serious risks: vascular complications. If filler is accidentally injected into or compresses a blood vessel, it can restrict blood flow to the surrounding tissue. In facial procedures, this is already something practitioners are trained to watch for very carefully. In the vulvar area, there's less standardized data, less long term tracking, less collective experience. And that matters, because here's what doesn't get said often enough: we have decades of research, refinement, and complication management when it comes to facial fillers. We do not have the same depth of data for this area. This is a newer application, which means the long term effects, how the filler behaves over time, how repeated treatments interact with tissue, how the area ages with intervention, are still being understood. And yet, the marketing language hasn't caught up to the uncertainty. It still sounds polished, predictable, routine, like this is just another quick tweak. And maybe for some people it is, but that confidence you're hearing, it's coming from an industry that benefits from making this feel normal, low risk, and easy to say yes to. Not from decades of deeply established long term evidence in this specific part of the body. And that doesn't mean no one should ever do it, but it does mean the full picture is a little more complicated than the consultation makes it sound. This is the part where things get a little uncomfortable. Because labia fillers aren't responding to a widespread medical crisis, they're responding to a cultural one. A moment where beauty standards have become so detailed, so specific, that even the most private parts of the body aren't exempt. A moment where aging isn't allowed to exist anymore. Not your face, not your body, not even here. And a moment where choice and pressure start to blur together. Because yes, people choose these procedures, but choices don't exist in isolation. They're shaped by what we see, what we're told, and what we're quietly made to feel. Sexologist and researcher Leonore Teifer has written extensively about this, describing the way industries expand definitions of problems in order to sell solutions. What starts as variation becomes framed as dysfunction. What was once normal becomes something to correct. And you can see that shift happening here in real time. Vulvas, historically diverse, variable, and largely unstandardized, are now being filtered through the same aesthetic lens as faces and bodies. Smooth, refined, optimized, even when there's nothing medically wrong. Dr. Sarah Crichton has repeatedly pointed out that many patients seeking genital cosmetic procedures have completely normal anatomy, but believe something is off because their reference point has narrowed so dramatically. Not because their bodies changed, because the standard did. And once that standard exists, it doesn't just sit there quietly. It gets reinforced, repeated, monetized. Advertising scholar Rosalind Gill talks about this as the confidence culture, where empowerment language is used to sell increasingly specific forms of self-surveillance. You're not being told you're inadequate. You're being told you could feel better, more confident, more comfortable. But the endpoint is the same. You're still being asked to look at your body and find something to fix. And when an entire industry profits from expanding the list of things you can fix, that list rarely gets shorter. It gets more detailed, more specific, more personal, until even the parts of your body that were never meant to be evaluated this closely are suddenly up for critique. And once beauty standards reach this level, it's not about improving the body anymore, it's about managing it. Here's what lingers. For years, we've been told beauty standards are becoming more inclusive, more flexible, less rigid. But trends like this suggest something else is happening too. They're not disappearing, they're spreading into smaller details, more private spaces, parts of the body you were never meant to analyze this closely. And once a standard reaches that level, it doesn't feel like beauty anymore. It starts to feel like surveillance. Like you're being asked to look at yourself from the outside, constantly checking, adjusting, refining, until even your most private, unexamined self isn't off limits. And that's the shift. Not just what we're changing, but how much of ourselves we're expected to monitor in the first place. So the next time you hear about a subtle enhancement you didn't know existed, pause. Because sometimes the most revealing question isn't, does this work? It's, who benefits from me believing this needs fixing? Friends, we have come to the end of the episode. I would like to apologize for maybe rushing through the episode, but my allergies today, there was a lot of sneezing involved. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't breathe through my nose. There was some mucus involved. I mean, it's kind of gross. It's disgusting. I'm sorry that I shared the details with you. But this is the reason why this episode seems a little bit, I don't know, rushed through. And I didn't mean it to be. Sometimes you just got to get things done. And today was one of those days where I needed to get this episode done. But anyway, if you enjoyed this episode of Beauty Unlocked, pass it along to your friends, your group chat, your coworkers, your family, anyone who would benefit from listening to something like this. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It genuinely helps more people find the podcast. Until next time, my love buckets, take care of yourselves and each other, and stay curious, always. You'll hear from me again next week, and hopefully I won't have allergies. Bye!
Make it clap, clap, clap. Make it clap, clap, clap. Make it clap, clap, clap. Make it clap, clap. Make it clap.